So when we think about the future of work, I think there's some fear out there that maybe robotics are going to eliminate jobs, also the impact of AI. But MIT is out with a new report showing that that is not necessarily the case. So for more on that, we want to bring in David Autor. He's a professor of economics at MIT. And we also have our very own Rick Newman joining the conversation. Professor, let's just start with some of the findings that you saw in this report. I guess help ease some of the fear out there. Why shouldn't people fear the future of work and the impact that technology and AI and robotics is going to have on their jobs?
Well, thank you very much for the question. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a complex story. Things are changing. There are monumental changes ahead, but they are unfolding slowly. There's time to adapt and to invest. However, that doesn't mean we can't blow it. Over the last 4 decades, we've had a lot of economic growth, but it hasn't really reached the median worker. It's been very concentrated at the top. And if we do that for the next 4 decades, it will not be a good outcome, and we will not benefit, most of us will not benefit from robotics in that case. So we have a lot less to fear from our technologies than we do from our institutions that channel rising productivity into shared rising incomes or fail to do so.
David, you mentioned that 40-year trend of what's kind of an economic polarization. Can you just describe why that's happening? And would you say that what we're seeing in terms of political polarization is somewhat a reflection of what's been happening to workers in the economy?
So it's a great question. So let me take the second one first. And I think the answer to that is yes, that there is a lot of evidence that political polarization is related to economic polarization, and particularly the China trade shock in the early 2000s that was so strongly associated with China's joining the World Trade Organization led to a lot of job loss and a lot of dissatisfaction. The rise of the Tea Party and in some sense the 2016 Trump victory was kind of formed and cemented in the areas that were most affected by that trade shock. But in terms of talking broadly about the economic polarization, there are a number of phenomena that are important. One is globalization, as I just said. Another really important one is that technology has automated a lot of the middle skill, what we call routine codifiable jobs in production, in clerical, and admin work, and kind of left this barbell of, on the one hand, professional and technical and managerial jobs that are highly educated, highly paid, and the other, a lot of personal service jobs, food service, cleaning, security, that use kind of generic skill sets and don't tend to pay well. So it has led to this hollowing out. But I want to make clear, it's not only technology, it's also policy choices that we have made. The kind of voice of workers in the form of unions and other organizations has been, really weakened over multiple decades. The minimum wage as a floor on the labor market has just kind of sank to irrelevance. Many other countries have faced the same set of challenges, the same globalization forces, the same technological forces, and have managed somehow to have more of the rise in productivity flow to the median worker and prevented the floor from falling as far as it has. That's why I say technology creates opportunities and challenges, but we have a lot of agency, a lot of control over how that works out. And I think the US has not managed that ideally, and I think we're paying a cost for that, both in diminished opportunity and a lot of public dissatisfaction.
So what would it look like right now in the real world, real time, to reverse that? Is it as simple as raising the minimum wage across the board, federal and state, to $15 an hour? What do people need to do? What does government and private sector need to do today?
Yeah, sure. So it's not an immediately reversible trend. Certainly, we should have a reasonable minimum wage, not too high, but one that has some bite and is indexed to inflation, so it stays there. We need to find new ways for workers to organize. I don't mean like necessarily bring back the old adversarial days of unions and firms, but there are many workers in care work and domestic work, restaurant work, who have no ability to kind of negotiate. And then more broadly, we should be interested in raising skills and improving the quality of jobs. Every rich country has workers at McDonald's, but what they are paid in those countries varies greatly, whether they have health insurance, whether they have paid vacation. So it took us a long time to get here. We're not going to get out of it that quickly, but there's opportunity to kind of bend the curve over time.
David, there's been a lot of attention paid to this subject. You've researched this extensively, so have other academics. And there's this kind of list of policy things we could do that we keep not doing. But what are some things that individuals can do for themselves so that more people are connected to the digital economy, to the global economy, and not just waiting for policymakers to come along and solve these problems for them?
Good. That's a good question. So, what individuals can most do is invest in their skills. And I do not want to say that skills is a solution. If you're not doing well, it's because you're unskilled. That's not correct. But certainly there are opportunities. Education is now more accessible, less expensive, and more kind of engaging than it has been in a long time because of all the ways of learning online through digital, for augmented reality, virtual reality. You can watch videos on Khan Academy, on YouTube, et cetera. So people can do that. But I think it's also, even at, if we're not waiting on federal policy, even at the level of communities and states, there's ability to organize, to kind of attract business, to create opportunity, to make places a inviting, terrain or soil for bringing in new business and new activities. So it's hard. It's actually hard for an individual to do. I don't think this is primarily the result of bad individual choices. Nevertheless, it is never a bad idea to invest in education. And that doesn't have to be a four-year college degree. It can be, there's many great jobs in medical paraprofessions that require skills and expertise, but don't require a baccalaureate degree. There's great jobs in the trades, in plumbing and electrical work and so on. What we don't want people to do is simply stop at a high school degree. That used to be a sufficient credential. Unfortunately, it no longer is.
Since you are studying future technology to some extent here, is there any emerging field that looks like it's going to be a real hot area for good jobs that don't necessarily require a college degree?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think the biggest of those is already here, and that's in medicine, right? Medicine accounts for 20%, or the health sector accounts for 20% of all US GDP, as millions of jobs. And so some of those, by the way, like for example, the medical tech jobs, many of them require specialization, but again, not a four-year degree. And they're both, their employment counts and their wages are rising rapidly. So people who are kind of work with health information services, with those electronic medical records, and all of the technology that supports that. So I think that's a good example. It is a concern that many of the fields that are emerging are going to be highly skilled. So for example, additive manufacturing, that's like 3D printing, that will be an enormously transformative technology for the way we make things. Making things will now be mostly digital until the point at which they are printed out effectively. That is going to put much more of a premium on cognitive skills and engineering expertise and mathematics, and less so on physical skills. So it is a concern in the case that some of these emerging sectors will primarily offer opportunity to people who are the most educated. But as I stressed, these things take literally 5, 10, 20 years to roll out. It is not an overnight process. And so if we both invest in human capital and invest in policy that channels rising productivity effectively, there can be a lot of opportunity. In many other countries, people are not as fearful of robots as we are here. And it's not because they don't have robots. It's because they expect, look, if the country gets more productive, we'll get more pay. And I don't think you would necessarily feel that way if your job is insecure. If you say, well, if the company gets more productive, they don't need me anymore. So it's going to make us wealthier. It's going to create opportunity. Whether that creates opportunity for a small number of people or a large number of people does depend a lot on how we structure the market and our governance to create those possibilities.
Professor David Autor, a professor of economics at MIT, we thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.